This weird B2B content strategy is going to drive you more pipeline with less output. Welcome back to a fresh episode of BreakingB2B.com. I'm your host, Sam Dunning. And if you want to join thousands of legends enjoying my weekday emails for unusual B2B marketing tips, experiments, SEO ideas, and podcast updates, head over to BreakingB2B.com and hit that newsletter tab. So joining me today, I've got Justin Simon. Justin is the founder over at Distribution First. Welcome to the show, sir. How are we?
Excellent, Sam. Thanks for having me on.
No worries, dude. Looking forward to the chat. So we're going to be diving into what a good content strategy means from a B2B perspective, how you can stand out when there's so much noise in B2B with media, LinkedIn posts, blog articles, YouTube content, podcasts, and more. How to create content that actually drives pipeline, revenue, inbounds, leads, and more, and how you can do more with less production and time. So with that, so many people claim to know what quote unquote good content is in the B2B space, yet you've only got to scroll around on YouTube, check out a few podcasts and LinkedIn to see there's so much stuff that's still sending you to sleep. So what does make a good content strategy from a B2B perspective today, Justin?
Oh man, yeah, that is that is the question, right? And especially, and AI doesn't make it any easier. The easy button that everybody wants with marketing or whatever they're doing in life. Now that I can just have AI go write me some stuff, that's got to be the way forward, right? And I think taking a step back and looking at it, good is obviously subjective. I think ultimately with content marketing, when you think about building a content strategy, your ultimate goal is to sell something at the end of the day.
Sure.
I think where folks get tripped up is trying to do that all at once or trying to do that with an all-in-one piece of content and not understanding the full scope of somebody's life cycle or how somebody wants to buy or how people even buy today. Just kind of, especially in B2B, I think it's a slow move toward this idea of self-select and like the idea of not wanting to talk to a salesperson, but me wanting to do as much research as humanly possible. And so I think from a content strategy and a content marketing perspective, that's where the opportunity lies, is how can I provide as much information and value ahead of time to try to answer as many questions as you might have. So rather than calling up our sales team and trying to wonder, hey, what do you guys do? Or I think I need this. They're coming armed with that knowledge and with that opportunity to say, awesome, I already know exactly what you stand for. I know what your POV is. I know I've been seeing you everywhere, and I'm ready to go. What does this look like? And I think that's the best way that I've seen sort of content work. It's not a silver bullet. It's not an easy button. It does take work to try to build those strategies and test things, but ultimately that's the goal.
Are you tired of competitors ranking above you on Google, stealing traffic, leads, and mindshare from dream clients every time they're searching for your services or offers on Google? At Breaking B2B, we fix that with our unusual approach to SEO, content marketing, and websites. We craft B2B SEO strategies and websites for revenue, not vanity. Head over to BreakingB2B.com to check our results, pricing, or to book a call with me. Got it. So are we saying influencing our target prospects so that almost our offering becomes the next logical decision for them, as well as providing almost sales enablement? So we're, like you said, arming our sales team with not just random content, but I'm guessing media, which comes in many forms, could be YouTube episodes, podcasts, articles, and I'm sure we'll dive into some of this stuff. But so they've actually got useful stuff there that I guess they can send out to prospects in their pipeline, or that folks can see before maybe even reaching out for a sales conversation, demo, or whatever that logical step is with your company.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding how that content is going to be used at that particular stage of the funnel Something you supply or give to somebody who's further down the funnel, they might need pricing. They might need, feature sets. They might need security options. They might, there's a different level of things you might need at that stage versus I'm problem aware and I kind of know what the problem is, but like, how do you guys solve that? Oh, awesome. Here's another piece of content. So it's, again, there's a lot of like, as I think about it, it's just taking a breath, taking that step back to understand the intent of the audience, understand why somebody is, it's not just, oh, here's our list of things that we send to people. Here's the list of things we put on podcasts. It's like, no, it's like, what's the intent of that piece of content you're creating?
Yeah. I love that mindset. And I want to get into a bit of a step-by-step a bit later in the episode of how B2B and SaaS companies can put this into play, a bit of a stepping stone. And I think it is difficult, especially for some smaller marketing teams or marketing teams of one that are perhaps tuning in, or solo founders, when they maybe think, well, I see these brands they're on LinkedIn, they're on TikTok, they're producing podcasts, they're on YouTube, they're pumping out articles. Like, I need to try and keep up with that. And as a result, they spread themselves so thin, their content is in a lot of places, but it's not really doing much because they're maybe doing like one episode per channel per month or something like that, or something even less. So like, what do you say to those folks that are kind of seeing maybe their giant competitors doing all this stuff and then trying to keep up with the Joneses, let's say?
Yeah, we all like to keep up with the Joneses. We all like to try and see what we've got. I think there is the tough part about the about where the internet is today is we see the results, but we don't see the inputs. So we don't know. We see Gary V everywhere. We see Hormozy everywhere. We see, or even X, Y, and Z company that's doing it really well. But we really have no clue how much time, effort, money, budget, people power goes into that result. And so I think sometimes it's very easy for us to over expect what we can actually produce or what we can actually distribute and what we can do with what we have. And so I think that's just one piece of it. But I will say there are companies, and there are marketers who are able to do that, get the most out of the things that they are creating. And I think that's the key, is if you are going to do that strategy, I would think about limiting the amount of bigger pieces that you're creating so that you can have time to focus on the repurposing, the distribution, and getting that content out there. I think that's one thing that a lot of that's sort of trending in marketing right now, is people coming to this awareness of, oh, I need to actually distribute the stuff I'm creating, which is great. That's not how it was 5 years ago. It was very much a publish and hope Google somehow does something with it, or like, yeah, when people search this, and it's like, well, is anybody going to search that topic? Maybe not. So from that perspective, I think just having a realistic take on what you can and can't do. And then I always suggest focusing on one or two channels to start and then expanding from there. I think it's way too easy. Like when I talk about the distribution first framework, it's really 4 phases, starting at foundation, moving into execution, optimizing, and then maximizing. It's the 4th phase. And what folks like to do is jump to the 4th phase before they've even set up a process or anything in place to actually make that happen. So what you're talking about is like, we're going to be on Twitter and send our LinkedIn email and do this podcast. And now we're on YouTube and we're going to do shorts. And it's like, that's a lot of stuff. Like you're maximizing before you even have built your foundation on like, what are your POVs? What channels really matter? What messages do you want to consistently get out? And that's how you end up on a bunch of channels with tons of random messages. And then you burn out 2 months later because like, I can't do all this.
I think there's probably a lot of B2B service providers or agency owners or similar that will tune into this and think, yeah, I hear that from prospects or clients so many times. Like in our world, in my world, in the SEO space, it might be, I want to ramp up my traffic by 50%, or I want to pump out all these blog articles, or I want to build out these landing pages. And be like, that's great, but why are we doing that? Like, let's take a step back, think about the strategy. Like, you probably want to do this to drive more sales calls or leads or signups. Like, we've got to think about how this is relevant to your ideal client profile and what they might be searching for, because there's no point doing it for the sake of it. It's got to have a rock solid strategy, or it's going to be a waste of your time, your cash, our resource. It's not going to drive the end result that everyone's hoping for, which is probably kind of qualified sales ops or pipeline. So Love that point. Are there any other kind of common mistakes you see, Justin, when it comes to B2B companies and their content plays, their content strategies?
I mean, there's probably more numerous than we could even talk about at this point, right? Like there are companies doing things really, really well, but there are also just companies that struggle. And ultimately, to me, it comes down to a lot of misalignment. There's a lot of internal things. There's so many factors that go into why, we'll say like bad content strategies get implemented, or why bad content, quote unquote, bad content gets created. But I think at the end of the day, it does come down to what you just talked about, which is like just having a strategy and knowing what path you're moving towards. So having goals are great. Like, I heard it said once, like every athlete in the Olympics, their goal is the same, gold medal. Like the goal doesn't really matter. It's the system in order to get you in that place to be able to do that thing. And it's the strategy you implement to be able to actually execute and get a gold medal, or set yourself up to be able to get that gold medal. Goals are great. Having those things set are great, but then like being able to actually do that is totally different.
Got it. So you touched upon it just now. Sounds like you've got a bit of a system that kind of your clients' prospects follow. Be great to break that down. So for anyone tuning in, marketers, founders that perhaps want to dig into more of a consistent strategy, and at the same time means that they can get more bang for buck out of the content that they do put out in the distribution sense. So what's the very first step they should take?
I think the very first step that I always advise folks is to take a look at their messages that they're sending out, or that they want to be known for. Because ultimately, when you're creating content, you want to tap into that. What's your POV on that message or that topic? So what's your unique POV? Because the message itself is not unique. Your competitors will be talking about that same message, but your take on that, your experience in that, and it might be your founders, it might be somebody who's the SME at the company, but tap into those folks to be able to speak to that POV. And then from there, understanding the channels that you want to be able to share those things on. And like we talked about, like minimizing the amount of channels that you have. And really the foundation is all about setting guardrails. So we don't have 12 messages going out with no POVs across 4 channels. We've got 4 messages with 4 strong points of view that we're sending out on 2 channels, and everything gets filtered through that. And once you have those things set, that's when you can actually go back to your existing content library and start to audit what we have in each of those categories that we can then create and share back out into the world. And so just a very basic example, let's say I have my podcast. I've got, 50 episodes, 20 episodes, whatever it is. I've now decided I have these 3 core messages that at the end of the year, I want people to know that I help do these things, and my strong points of view on them are X, Y, and Z. Now what I'm going to do is actually go back to that library and start auditing my content to say, all right, what do I have that's existing that fits into these buckets? And now, but after I get done doing that, and if you have a blog or you're a B2B company with a blog, I'm sure, the options are endless depending on how long you've been blogging, but you can find, what you'll see is you actually find a bunch of content that you already have speaking to those messages. And then you can take that and start repurposing, remixing it. Maybe you take a couple of those podcast episodes, mash them together and become a guide. Or maybe you take those, that webinar on that topic and cut it up and start dripping those things back out on social media with your new POVs attached to them. And so that's kind of the baseline foundation of being able to do some of this stuff. Is none of what I just talked about was creating anything brand new.
Let's break that down a bit further. So one of the first points you said was the messaging side of things and having a point of view. Are there any tips or examples? So I guess folks tuning in can make sure that if they've got perhaps a few choices there, they can make sure what they're going to put into the market hits home And then perhaps after that, we can kind of dive into channels to choose that make sense.
Yeah, there's a couple questions that I would think about. Well, the main one being kind of like, what do you, and we've already touched on some of these things, but like, what do you see that's wrong with your current marketplace, with the current world in which your company exists in? If you sell, if you're a B2B paid ads agency, what's wrong with the way people do B2B paid ads typically? What rubs you the wrong way? A lot of those things can start, or if you're the content person, you're not the expert, talk to your SMEs, talk to your founders, talk to why did you start this business? What do you see? Where do you see the business moving? That it isn't. What are some of the things? And those will sort of evolve those takes. I think it's really clear that your POVs have to be yours, or like your company, like they can't just be made up. Like, I've got this strong opinion, I'm just going to have a strong opinion. That might work for a post, but over time that'll wear thin, because ultimately you have to be able to speak to your point of view through your own experiences, or through the experiences that are shared within your company. So I think understanding what those things are, and then on the sort of flip side of that, another one is just passions. So what are you passionate about? What are those things that get you up in the morning, that get you excited to help solve these problems, and really try to speak into those as well. And I think ultimately the tough part with POVs is you're really looking for something, especially with a really strong POV or a spiky point of view, as some people call it, is you want something that's a little bit polarizing. Not everybody is that way, but you should, your point of view should be strong enough that people are either like nodding their head, or like, I don't know about that. Like, that guy's, he's full of crap.
There's a lot of that at the time of recording this anyway, going around in LinkedIn, like hooks.
Yeah.
So for anyone that's not familiar with that, when you scroll LinkedIn, you'll see maybe the first 2 or 3 lines before you click the see more button. And it feels like almost anyone that wants to get a post to take off right now has to start it with, this is how I scaled my company from 0 to 250 million against like the growing pressures of VC funding.
I didn't know there were so many successful companies, and I like
almost every post now is like how I scaled from 0 to 250 million with VCs with axes ready to kill me.
Yep. Yeah. I was. Yeah. It's sometimes hilarious how, X is the same way, but is any of these social media platforms, you go on there, and again, like, I think that's where it's, being true and being authentic to who you are. Maybe that's true and authentic to somebody. It would not be true and authentic to me to just sort of like spout things off. And I think I've had conversations with folks too, and it's like, oh, people just lie. Like, people just straight up lie. And it's like, it's hard for me to like think about doing that, because I would have a really hard time doing that. But there are absolutely people on the internet who are just straight up lying in every single hook they do and trying to sell you a service. They're trying to sell you something.
Yeah. There's some weird ones out there. And how do I think the picking faults with your industry is cool. That is literally the foundation of my business, really. Like our headline, our homepage is B2B SEO and websites for revenue, not vanity, for many reasons that I've shared on the show before, just because we got kind of pissed off with what other agencies were doing and wanted to take a stand for it. So I love that. And I love that concept. Is there a way that when you're kind of picking this point of view and this messaging and these almost the foundations of your content strategy, that it can actually, that you're ensuring that at the same time it's tied back to your product or your offer? Because a lot of folks go crazy with this stuff, and sometimes they have a really cool point of view, but it's not actually tied back to product or offer. So they might be getting eyeballs or whatever, or visits or traffic, but it's not putting cash in the bank.
Yeah, 1,000. And it's funny, I was trying to find it when I brought it up here, because I had a couple other questions and topics I use when I think about things. And then the number 2 is, how do your services or products solve the pain points of your target audience? And, as you're framing up your points of view, I think, to your point, Sam, you hit the nail on the head, is ultimately, if our goal is to sell something, having a strong point of view around something you don't sell or don't help people with it's okay, but like me having a strong opinion on water quality doesn't matter to what I don't sell water. Uh, but if I did sell water, having a strong opinion around water quality and how it needs to be pure and X, Y, and Z, and there's this and that, like that would make a ton of sense. And so I think to your point, yeah, like ultimately your points of view only matter from a marketing perspective if they tie back to what you actually sell and relate to the service that you provide.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So picking, I think you said pick a couple channels to start with. Any tips for how to pick channels that are going to make sense?
Yeah, I mean, right off the top of my head, again, it's going to be different for everybody, but three things that I would think about as you're picking channels is number one, know your audience. So you should know your audience better than anybody else and know where they're at. It's easy for probably me and you, Sam, to be like, oh, LinkedIn is the obvious choice. We're in
Sure.
B2B, we sell to B2B, we talk to a bunch of people in B2B. And if you are doing that, yes, LinkedIn does make a ton of sense. Um, but there are tons of industries where LinkedIn may or may not make sense. There are a ton of industries where specific industry forums might make a
Mm,
ton of sense for somebody to be present on and to hang out in and to get to know those folks. I mean, it's no like very similar. Like, why do we all hang out on LinkedIn? So we can get to know the folks and understand their problems and talk to them. So maybe you have an industry forum that's that same way that you can do that with. So but knowing your audience, knowing where they're hanging out, and I think just knowing also what's worth the time and energy to do. So just because you can post that same video on Instagram, if your audience isn't there, it probably doesn't matter. It's probably just taking up mind space and time for you to do that. So again, I think just thinking through and where your audience is at, and then whittling those down. The other huge one, honestly, is just understanding the channel. A lot of folks just blindly put content out on a channel, right? Like I posted my video on Shorts. Well, there's a very like let's take YouTube Shorts as a great example because unless you spend the time on that and understand that if you put a video that's vertical and all that, if you put it and it's over 59 seconds, it's not going to show up correctly as a short. It's actually going to show up as a normal video that looks odd.
mm.
And again, it's the small nuances to each channel. And you might be putting out just tons of like 2 or 3 minute vertical clips being like, oh, our shorts are going to take off. And they never show up as shorts. Or you might be putting up 1 minute and 4 second shorts that never show up as shorts and actually look weird on your channel and they don't have a proper thumbnail. It's odd. But again, it's knowing the channel. And there are nuances to every single one of these things. X has their own nuances. LinkedIn has its nuances. So I think understanding those. And then the third thing that trips people up is not choosing a channel that they actually enjoy. And this isn't everybody doesn't have this option, but if you do have
Yep.
this option, choose a channel you enjoy. If you do not like doing video, don't do it right now. Even if everybody is telling you to do video, unless you're interested in learning it and like getting over that growth curve and trying to that. But like if you hate it, you're not going to do it. If you hate writing long form, you're going to hate doing blogging and newsletters. Or maybe you just have to adjust what those things look like for you. But I think choosing a channel and being able to focus on those, that will help you level up. Again, that's phase two kind of execution. Like when you
Mm.
start to execute on that stuff, that informs you so you can then optimize and maximize what you're doing.
That third point is great. That third point is great. I think that's a good point in general around not necessarily enjoying all of the work that you do, but at least enjoying an aspect of it. Because it's almost like
Mhm.
starting your own business. I mean, for example, I hate paperwork, I hate accounting, I hate finance. I love creating content, love marketing, love selling, love producing stuff. Any of the kind of tax keeping, the writing work, the finance, I'm terrible at. That's why I outsource it. But if you can, let's say you're employed, like if you're a marketer in a business, you can enjoy some element of it. And perhaps for you, that is podcasting and interviewing industry folks in your industry so you can learn from them, build relationships with them, and produce great content. Then if you can enjoy that little nugget like that, it makes such a difference. And that shines through, right? Doesn't it? In whether that's video, whether that's audio, whether that's a written piece of content, people are gonna feel that in a way that's not necessarily super tangible, but it's gonna shine through.
And when you're choosing less, right? Like when you're focusing down and picking one or two, that gives you that freedom and flexibility to act. Like, I don't understand TikTok. Well, if I'm just doing TikTok and LinkedIn, like, okay, cool. I now am freeing myself up to be able to learn that platform and be able to actually understand it and start to learn those nuances, versus if it was one of 5, 6 other channels that I'm trying to do. At that point, you're literally just trying to get that stuff out and post it. Like, it's just the natural reaction that there is. If you're even if you're on a team with a couple people who are working on things, like, it's just, I think, human nature to be like, all right, there's a lot going on here. I'm just gonna post these things out and get it to work. Versus if you're focusing on a couple, that allows you to actually kind of have the creativity and like creative space to be able to learn that new platform.
Got it. So you mentioned just now about utilizing a catalog of existing content. So that could be, let's say you decided to double down on video, and that could be that you've got past blog articles that are like, I don't know, maybe some of them are how to choose the best vendor in your space, and you decide that you're going to squeeze that down into a long form video breakdown or something like that. But what if we don't have a solid back catalog of content that we can arm ourselves with? Like, what if we're struggling a bit? Any ideas there?
I think there's absolutely no harm in talking to folks that you're trying to sell to. I mean, if you're early on, like, don't even have product market fit, or wouldn't have probably like a content market fit at that point, like understanding what your audience actually even needs. I think talking to actual humans, you can never go wrong in doing that. And I would say do that, first of all, because you're going to get context, you're going to be able to ask questions, all that type of stuff. On the flip side, there is this thing called artificial intelligence that you can use to help formulate some of these ideas. So if you are just trying to get some content ideas or understand what might be interesting, you can absolutely use a tool like ChatGPT or other tools to be able to help you. You can prompt your way into getting some content ideas that might be interesting, and then take and kind of run with those. And how I would suggest that too is start small. So if you've got a new content idea, rather than creating the brand new podcast or the doing a big old webinar, potentially start on a smaller distribution channel like LinkedIn or email or something like that, where the lift isn't as high, and you can kind of test and validate that idea ahead of time.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, customer research makes sense. Like, that's going to be super useful if you've got some existing customers that were recently signed up with your services or your offer or your SaaS. Then you can ask them questions. Like, if they're up for an interview, you can understand, like, what are the channels that you actually use? Like, do you listen to podcasts, or do you go to events, or is there a certain industry, like you said, forum or group that you tend to hang out in? And when you start seeing patterns in those responses, it's going to be really useful to actually know where's going to be worth your time and where's definitely not going to be worth your time. And at the same time, they'll probably give you some insights into, during that sales process, like some of the questions that they might be asking, or maybe some of the objections they're bringing up to your sales team. That's going to be quite useful content that might be worth you tackling or considering scheduling. So we've talked about quite a lot of the foundational stuff around messaging, point of view, channels, enjoying it, tying it back to your product, and so forth. Like, once we've kind of, let's say we've put all that into play, we've got that foundational stuff, perhaps we've put that all together in a Google Doc. Like, what's the next thing we do?
Now we're going to start executing. We're going to start actually shipping that stuff out. We've got our plan. We know what we want to do. We're going to start. How I think about it is, I call them distribution docs, but Now there are tools or other things you can use for this, but it's, for me, a simple blank Google Doc or a Notion doc or however you want to do it. And it's really just kind of starting to break those pieces out. So if you have a podcast, what are the main topics? What are the main things that we talked about? What are all of those, solid bits and pieces that are inside that? What channels do we want to create that content on? And then how do we create that sort of platform native or zero click type content for those specific channels? So if I'm creating a LinkedIn or a series of LinkedIn posts out of that podcast, what are the individual valuable nuggets that I can pull out and share to where somebody can get value and get information without ever having to actually listen to the full podcast? If I'm sending an email, what's the value that somebody can get out of that without having to listen to the full podcast or watch a full webinar or read the full blog post? And again, I think that's a shift too, is moving away from just the promotional post to click or the promotional email to click. Hey, we have this new thing, go listen. Hey, we have this new thing, go watch it. Hey, we have this webinar, sign up. Rather than doing that, it's actually creating types of content that that spur interest and make somebody want to go actually check that thing out. And there are tons of creative ways that you can do that. I mean, even when I was at Metadata, one of the most creative things that we did ahead of our demand event when I was there was we brought speakers on that were going to be at the event, and we brought them on and had them talk about topics that were just adjacent to what their talk was going to be on the podcast months in advance. And so then by the time we announced the speaker list and had that, it was such an easy tie-in to the other event we were going to do. But again, it felt natural. It was like, hey, and by the way, if you like this topic, like, go sign up for demand. It's free. It just makes it such a more natural tie-in to what we were doing versus than what it probably could have been or what the typical B2B play is.
Nice. And are there any best practices in your opinion when it comes to, like, a lot of this we've talked about is like pillar content or long form content? So for example, you might choose video, be that perhaps your founder talking in front of camera, and you queue them up with some set questions that you want them to attack, or maybe it's a podcast where you, like you just mentioned there, you're interviewing kind of potential prospects or folks that are knowledgeable within your industry or within your sector. When it comes to actually a distribution strategy for that, you shared some nice ideas about what we call zero-click content within LinkedIn. So it's not just head over to here to catch the full episode with an image and a link, but it's actually diving into a nugget in some detail, sharing some tips, some insights, some ideas. And then if you want to check out the full thing, like check the comments or check this link, whatever. Are there any kind of guidelines around distribution, like what tends to work well and what you should avoid, really? Because like there's so many bad ways of doing it, and there's at the same time there's some nice ways of doing it that almost has the piece standing as a piece of content, like it can hold its own.
I think that's probably at its core how I would think about it, is just how do you make that piece sort of stand on its own?
Yeah.
And I think thinking about that ahead of time can actually make your core content, that pillar content that you're creating, better. So, I mean, a very simple example that I use a lot is, if you're writing a blog post, let's say, and you're like, I've got to share this on LinkedIn, or and you like know that ahead of time, in your editing phase, it will change how you view that edit, because it's not only just about that standard piece of content. It's about what are the sections in here that are interesting. How could I take that and maybe add a listicle inside of it, or just change how it's formatted so it makes it more prone and more natural to be able to share that back out? Are there things missing that would be beneficial for somebody knowing we want to share that back out? And so I think just understanding, having that at the forefront before you even create something, is going to change how you create it. And then I think the biggest thing is having what I would call like a content floor. So what's your baseline? What's your non-negotiable baseline for your content and for your distribution? So is it one email a week and 3 days on LinkedIn? Or is it, whatever that ends up being? I think having that baseline of what content you're creating. So is it a podcast every week? Is it a webinar every month? Is it a blog post every 2 days? Like whatever that is, like what is that? And then what is the standard content floor distribution off of that you can meet, that you can realistically meet? And I think at the start for folks, it's probably not much. It's like, can we get 3 LinkedIn posts that get shared out once a week, each of the following weeks after this podcast goes live? Like that should not be that difficult to do. And then just making sure those things get scheduled out. And then again, that's your execution baseline. And then from there, you can start to optimize. From there, you can start to maximize.
Nice. Yeah, I love the foundational stuff. I love the fact of a lot of it's just mapping out kind of what you can commit to, what a sensible flow or cadence is going to be. Don't go too crazy at the start. Set something that's actually going to be realistic. So you're not going to get there the week before and think, oh, I can't be asked to make this video this week, or I can't be asked to put out these emails or these LinkedIn posts, whatever those kind of foundational channels you decide on. So it's actually achievable, and then slowly ramping it up. So as we go on, like, how can we make sure that what we're putting out, because I'm sure that when marketers are wanting to get more resource or more buy-in or maybe more budget for assistance with some of these things, the roadblock they're probably going to stumble in with the exec team or leadership team is like, how can we make sure that this is definitely going to tie into bringing back some sales opportunities and revenue? What would your response be there?
Definite tying into revenue is tough. That's probably a conversation to have. Or it's always hard, right? Because you never want to be in a place where you're trying to tie a LinkedIn post to driving more revenue. Like you don't want, that's a bad place to be in. If that's what your bosses are asking for you, it might be time to like just look around and see what else is out there, or see who, that's a bad spot to be in. That is a spot a lot of marketers are in though as well. Like, all right, we're going to send this email. How many XY, what are we going to get out of it? And I think just taking a step back, it's probably more so about looking at where the business's health is at in comparison to what you're doing on the marketing side in a more macro environment, right? So over a longer period of time, maybe take a quarter and see like leads in, pipeline, revenue, and then take, from your output, what did we do? What did we send? I think the more zoomed out you can get, the better, like, because any given month can be down, and then you're going to try to shift your strategy when it really wasn't anything. People were just on vacation, or like maybe you didn't send something that you could have, or there's so many factors that go into that. So I think just from that perspective, in terms of like, how do you start to know, I think taking a little bit of a wider look, and then understanding that marketing is just one piece of the pie. I mean, this from running your own business. Like if all you did was market and you never sold anything, or you never had good customer service, or good, like your business would fall apart. Like you could have the best marketing in the world and it wouldn't matter. And so I think just understanding, like, I think sometimes as marketers, especially as you hang out in B2B spheres and all that, it's like, all right, marketing and revenue. And like, how do we drive, and it's an entire business. If all these other functions weren't needed, we'd just have a marketing team.
Yeah. It's a great point. And sometimes, like you say, a lot of the time you've got to have a leadership team that not necessarily has a full understanding of how marketing works, but is going to allow you to have some flex to say, look, this is the plan I've built out. This is my hypothesis that we're going to test this for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months on this program. These are like some, I don't know, qualitative outcomes we expect, i.e. when someone books a demo or sales call, they might say after 6 months, they've listened to our podcast, or they've received our weekly emails or stuff like this. And from a quantitative, more statistical level, it might say more branded search to our website, more direct traffic, these kind of things. Like these are the signals that we can physically look out for, and that we can ping you in Slack as and when we see these upticks. And then on the back end, yes, we'd hope to see some sales demos, but it's not going to be bang. Chances are we're probably selling a B2B solution that's cost more than $20. It's probably in the 5 figures, 6 figures per year. And how often do you wake up and decide to spend 6 figures on an offer? There's usually a lot more that goes into it. You're going to do your research on Google. You're going to listen to videos. You're going to listen to podcasts. You're going to ask your peers. Like,
and there's probably multiple people at that company that have to sign off on that decision. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you might have the bet.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's tons of people listening that have had this situation. Like, you've got that champion, but then, or maybe you've been that champion before inside a company and like, we really need this. This is going to be great. And then it, rains down for that. No, we're not doing that. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Sometimes, like you say, it's just talking about your team, just thinking like when you last bought a seriously big piece of software or service, like what was that journey like? And then some of the stuff they start telling you would be like, well, we Googled it, then we had a chat, then we went to a conference, then we went to a trade show, then we forgot about it for 3 months, then we had a podcast, then we Googled it again. It's like, exactly. Yeah. So sometimes things need to be flipped on the head and thoughts need to be challenged. So yeah, all for that. Anything else that we should add in that I've not touched on, Justin, around this strategy that to make sure it's going to be a success and folks have got the ideas and strategies to take away and put it into play?
I mean, we touched on a lot of it. I think there's so many nuances within each section. I'm actually working on building a lot of this stuff out inside of my membership, just the Distribution First membership, and trying to help people actually build these things out and be able to be consistent with these things, because there is a lot of nuance on it. But at the same time, it is just that taking that step back and building out the system ahead of trying to do too much at once. I think that's one of the biggest struggles that folks have is just trying to do too many things at once. Head gets spinning, and then you end up not wanting to do anything at all. And so if I could just encourage folks, it'd be, go to phase one, start those, from those steps, and really build your foundation, understand why you're creating what you're creating, what your opinion is on the content that you're creating that you can weave in, what's your state, and then what channels you're going to share those on. And then, like I said, tap back into your existing content. There are just probably hundreds of thousands, millions of pieces of content out there on the world that are not ranking on Google, but are just sitting on your site waiting to be shared again. And so I think being able to understand what you have as an existing asset that you've already created, and then being able to reuse that, that's an asset. That is an asset for you. It's an investment you have made, and now you get the awesome opportunity to go tap back into that.
Don't get me started about how many B2B SaaS companies are pumping out 10, 15, 20 blog articles a month that have no search value. They don't even do basic keyword research. All they need to do is go into a tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush, look for a relevant keyword and structure the article properly with the URL, the metadata, the heading tags, and they could start getting that shit ranking. Like, some of that stuff is painful, man. Anyway, Justin, really appreciate the breakdown. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us on all things content distributing. With that said, please do tell us more about how folks tuning in can learn from you and connect with you. Best ways to get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So the two best ways to get to kind of know what we're all about at Distribution First. One is we have a podcast called Distribution First, comes out every week. Literally right now we are in a series where we're breaking down the entire framework. So great time to start listening if you haven't been. And so we're going to break down the framework bit by bit. And then on the more advanced side, if this is something you want to implement at your company, or you want to learn how to do distribution first for your business, I have a full membership and community that has monthly trainings, group workshops, and in a full-on community where we're actually helping people level up on this exact topic, specifically distribution, repurposing, and remixing content. And you can learn more about that at distributionfirst.club.
Legend. We'll put all of those links in the show notes and descriptions below. With that, thanks once again, Justin. Enjoy the chat.
Awesome.
Cheers, man. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, why not join thousands of B2B legends enjoying our weekday newsletter? Head over to breakingb2b.com, hit that newsletter tab, and you'll get some more unusual B2B marketing stories, experiments, SEO ideas, and podcast releases. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one for more no BS B2B marketing tips to grow your business, grow your revenue. Cheers for tuning in. Catch you soon.